ruks. Ilgi, ilgi priekā zaļā, tāpēc jau mans nams ir tukšs. Kur viss atstāju es vaļā. Ruks, 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 ruks. Ilgi, ilgi priekā zaļā, tukšs, 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 tukšs. Kur viss atstāju es vaļā. Viena alga, kas tev priekšā, draugu pulks vai zvēru bars. Galvenais, lai tevī pašā uzbrauc rocars. Viena alga, kas tev priekšā, draugu pulks vai zvēru bars. Galvenais, lai tevī pašā uzbrauc bum, 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 bum.
BALTIC FREEDOM WAY. The Baltic Freedom Way is the most striking example of the cooperation among Baltic nations during the Third Awakening period, whose grounds were already laid at the beginning of the 20th century. None of the three nations could have defended their newly regained independence without each other's support. In the summer of 1920, at a conference in Bulduri, a decision was made to form the Baltic Entente, but it did not work out due to the conflict between Lithuania and Poland. However, Latvia and Estonia established a closer military cooperation. On September 12, 1934, Vilhelms Munters, Stasys Lozeraitis, and Julius Seljama signed an agreement on the formation of the Baltic Entente. Latvia and Estonia, at the same time, disassociated themselves from Lithuanian territorial conflicts. It was one of the reasons the military alliance of the three countries was never established. The Baltic governments agreed to agree on foreign policy matters that have common importance and provide mutual political and diplomatic aid in their international relations. After the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, each Baltic country tried to implement its own foreign policy, stopped coordinating their actions, and did not even inform their counterparts on Soviet ultimatums. Shortly after the start of the Second World War, the Soviet Union turned the Baltic countries into its protectorate and established military bases there. In June 1940, the Soviet Union occupied the three Baltic countries, and in August, after falsified elections, incorporated them. Actual Baltic cooperation and action coordination started when the three countries began the restoration of their independence. Baltic delegations within the Soviet of People's Deputies of the USSR cooperated. They organized the Baltic Freedom Way and supported each other's efforts in the independence process. The three Baltic nations would not have been able to restore their statehood and break free from the stranglehold of the USSR without each other's support. The Baltic Assembly was founded in Tallinn for the joint congress of the three Baltic people's movements. Sąjūdis in Lithuania, the Popular Front of Latvia, and Rahvarine in Estonia. It was necessary in order to draw the attention of the international community and to demonstrate that the Baltic countries were moving towards the restoration of independence quite purposefully.
Обращаемся к генеральному секретарю ООН.
We addressed the UN Secretary-General and the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR and asked the Soviet government to denounce Soviet policy towards the Baltic countries in 1939 and 1940 and to declare the Pact of August 23, 1939 and its secret protocols null and void, and to not obstruct the restoration of statehood of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
Года совместно с секретными протоколами и не будет препятствовать восстановлению государственного суверенитета Эстонии, Латвии и Литвы.
If it wasn't for the Baltic Assembly and Baltic unity at the time, I doubt if the Baltic countries would be in the position they are now. In the case of the Baltic Way, its organization was the starting shot after which the entire process really began. I believe that our unity, the fact that we marched in step, ensured the victory of the Baltic countries. Our greatest hope on the road towards independence was to achieve it during negotiations with Moscow, first at the Congress of the People's Deputies of the USSR, where, despite the totalitarian regime, a considerable group of democratically minded deputies have been elected thanks to alternative elections, the Baltic deputies, and also the interregional group from Russia. We had a commission that dealt with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and its public release. We knew that our main issue in Moscow would be the recognition of the fact that the Baltic countries were incorporated into the Soviet Union illegally. We started to feel a huge counter-reaction. Of course, there were people in the Kremlin that realized what the investigation and discovery of the truth would cost them. It was the main issue for us, and we demanded at the start of the Congress that the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or Stalin and Hitler conspiracy, would be reviewed at the Congress and an official investigation would begin. We managed to achieve it. Though Gorbachev maintained that there are no secret protocols, we only later found out that he lied and had at that time studied the protocols. He had them, but obviously realized it's the death of the USSR and was not about to let that happen. Mavriks Wolfsons, board member of the Popular Front, was especially active. He went to Germany, met the last witnesses that had taken part in the drawing up of the secret protocols. This deal was the secret that brought about the Second World War. This secret revealed itself step by step. You know it. If you do not let me speak, I respect your opinion, of course. I'd like to say one thing. I shouldn't? 5 minutes. Okay, give me another minute. If you don't, you don't. Go on, speak, speak. Will this disrespect towards small nations really be our general policy? Do you really doubt that there was such a protocol? That there was a pact? That armed forces were deployed in these countries on the exact dates at the exact time? I am a witness of these events. I verified it when I compared it with the protocol. Everything happened by the minute. The Baltic actions had an emotional impact on the peoples of the Soviet Union because all these oppressed peoples, including Russians, realized if the Baltic people can do it, why can't we? Why can't we straighten our shoulders and fight against the regime and the empire? The Baltic Council convened, I think, around June 15th in Panevėžys. This was the council that decided to organize the Baltic Freedom Way, from border to border through the Baltic countries. We sat in the basement of a Panevėžys Catholic church, surrounded by 2-meter thick walls. Lithuanian colleagues said it was safe, because the KGB microphones would hear nothing. Edgar Savisaar came up with the idea. Edgar Savisaar, the leader of the Popular Front of Estonia, suggested during discussion, what if we formed a live chain, all the nations from Tallinn through Riga to Vilnius? Because, of course, it was important for us to make a huge mass campaign to attract the attention of the Kremlin, as well as the Western community, to the fact that the issue of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact is topical and exists. We needed to attract the attention of the world to this event. And we saw no other way but to organize a mass campaign that would make people get involved. The Baltic Way was not a happy gathering. It was a political campaign, and we hoped it would have a result. There was this belief that people are ready to come out with bare hands, so to speak, to show that our fight is unanimous and non-violent, and to show that we are able to self-organize quite well. The Baltic Way we talk about was not and is not just an event of that one day. It was a huge political event in the Baltic countries that came into the history arena with a peaceful demand for freedom and independence.
Su taikiu reikalavimu, taikiu laisvės ir nepriklausomybės reikalavimu.
The Kremlin could have explained our actions as a provocation if they wanted to, a pretext to shoot, to arrest, and deport. Just as we brought peaceful people to the Baltic Way, it would be a pretext for the Kremlin to bring columns of tanks to the Baltic Way. We needed to confer without the KGB's knowledge. We had an agreement with the CSIS chapter of the Popular Front to organize this secret meeting for us. Local Popular Front members met us and drove us through labyrinths of forest roads for about an hour until we arrived at a place I don't even remember now. A moment later, the Lithuanians and Estonians also arrived, and from morning till night we perfected the text for the appeal to the Baltic Way. We feared that if the Baltic Way fell apart, it would happen in Latvia, considering that the Soviet army was stationed here, and Latvia was the most Russified of the Baltic countries. And the Baltic Way could have caused incomprehension among non-Latvians that were already clueless as to what's happening in Latvia. There are more than 50% of Russians living in the Republic, but only Latvian is recognized as the official language. Is it fair? No, Of course, we felt constant fear because the repressive organs of the occupational power were constantly present, along with the ideology. But people started to believe that they could at least do something. We had experience from 1988, when we had two large demonstrations, one with 150,000 participants and the other with 300,000. Without these events, we wouldn't have had the experience to organize the Baltic Way. Two things happen at once: large transformation and spiritual emancipation. Fearless people dismissing the reign of terror. I used to think, I'll suffer, I'll lose my job, I'll be locked in an asylum, my family will suffer, etc. But fear disappeared. Noble people emerged, citizens of their country. With the emergence of citizens, the state emerges. We estimated that we needed at least 200,000 people on the route, but with the condition that they are spread evenly along the entire route, and that is absolutely impossible. We realized that to succeed, we needed at least 300,000. We had to transport these people. Cars were a great luxury at the time. On the morning of August 23rd, we found out that we were forbidden to coordinate the action through radio. Authorities had mobile transmitters for communication, and we thought we could use those. The Communist Party did everything to prevent us from using these frequencies that were under strict KGB control. People have forgotten that mobile phones weren't always available. There were no mobile phones at the time. It was practically impossible to communicate with people who had left their homes, who were already on the road. It was a very hard blow, because we had counted on being able to communicate how the chain is forming, where we needed more people, and where there are too many people. Sąjūdis distributed instructions to their chapters in all towns and districts on where people must go, where they should stand to be sure it succeeds. There was a coordinator for each kilometer, and they had to make sure there are people, allowing 1.5 meters per person. All chapters of the Popular Front throughout Latvia, from Daugavpils to Liepāja, agreed on who goes where along the Baltic Way route to cover the entire route. There were difficulties everywhere because it's difficult to organize such a large-scale event. But people's enthusiasm and readiness to participate outweighed all difficulties. The last resort was an agreement with the management of Latvian radio that it would provide coordination through live broadcasts, just like in Estonia and Lithuania. Let's hold each other's hands even tighter. Let's find our support in the black soil upon which we stand, in the blue skies that have opened above us today, though they wept with us earlier, and in the light of the honest aspirations in our hearts.
Māmuļa, jūra mūs apskalo, svētījot un vīlinot naidniekus. Liktenis vējš auroja vēsti, aptumsa debes, kritām mēs drošībā. Mammuļa šķelta un šķērsotā, vētra nāk, kā viplam debesīs. Nomaktā, sīsla un tauta, latviešu tauta, mirst un atkal dzims. Brīvību Baltijai, brīvību Baltijai. Lai līdens to lemj, to lūdzam Tev, Dievs, atsaucies!
From that day, I remember only that I was wearing yellow rubber boots and a cornflower wreath on my head that my mom had made, and I was standing on the Baltic Way together with grown-ups and contributing, even though I was just a little boy. I felt that it was something very important and that I must be there. I felt proud of that day and of myself. When we all joined hands, there was a feeling that you could sense the Estonians on the other end, but here, Latvians were joining us with Estonians. I felt euphoric, very euphoric. There were 4 of us. We studied together and participated together. Obviously, we felt braver in a group. Let's see how many participants there are, and then let's decide. If there were just 5 of us on empty streets, I wouldn't have gone. But when we saw crowds, we thought, oh, come what may, we're not doing anything wrong. I was born on August 23rd, 1989. I wouldn't say it changed my life that I was born on that particular day. But I can say I'm proud of being born on this day. I was born on August 23rd, 1989. We haven't spoken much about this event in our family, apart from the fact that my mom always reminds me that I was born on the day of the Baltic Freedom Way. I was born on August 23rd, 1989. For me, it's symbolic that half a century after such a tragic event, I was born. I took it as a symbol, and the Baltic Way, something enormous happened, and I was born right on that day. It always makes me feel fantastic. The Baltic people, including Latvia, had attracted attention with the Baltic Way, and it left, I think, a very light and positive impression all over the world. But this rally for freedom had to be very visible. I suppose one could see it from space, just like the Great Wall of China. We did not expect the reaction we had on the morning of August 26th, when a couple of days after the Baltic Way, the Politburo of the CPSU made quite a horrifying decision regarding the Baltic people. The language of the declaration was so harsh that Western powers started to prepare for the worst scenarios, similar to those of Czechoslovakia or Hungary. The West didn't applaud us either because they were interested in the preservation of the Soviet Union and some kind of agreement between us and Gorbachev. I wouldn't say that everybody was overly happy about it. It was said in no uncertain terms that the extremist leaders of the Baltic countries, including myself, Landsbergis, and Savisaar, threatened the very existence of the Baltic people. To be more precise, we are going to shoot. They said it quite clearly. We will roll out our tanks at once and we'll shoot. But obviously, the rolling out of tanks would not be advantageous to Gorbachev because it would also mean his downfall. I think it's one of the most important elements why after the warnings from the Western capitals, including Washington, there were no sanctions against the Baltic popular movements. Only the international community and the Soviet Union's dependence on international opinion prevented an armed intervention and large-scale arrests in the Baltic countries. Latvia was an undiscovered land for the Western leaders that came here. In private conversations, Western politicians admitted, "You've had a much more interesting life here because something happened every day. But we wouldn't like to experience this interesting stuff again." In fact, they came to voice a powerful message, and this message was meant for Russia. Of course, for Latvia as well, but Latvia also needed this message to let them know that we have left never to return. I think people who came, especially the leading Western politicians that I had a chance to meet, were surprised about our way of thinking, about the dynamic through which events unfold here, and also about this intellectual ability to solve very complex and complicated things without any violence. The most important visit of all, of course, was that of Bill Clinton.
Today we remember an August day just 5 years ago when the peoples of your nations joined hands in common cause. You showed the peoples of the world the power of the Baltic Way. Now today I stand with you here, and on behalf of all Americans, I proudly take a place in that unbroken chain for freedom.
Many of them said quite clearly that they are coming with the hope that these new countries, these new dynamic politics that had started in the Baltics, will also rejuvenate old Western politics, that it will bring new energy. Among many high-profile visits, one was especially awaited since the restoration of independence, namely that of Pope John Paul II of Rome.
Tai Romos popiežiaus Jono Pauliaus antrojo vizitas. 93 rugsėjo pradžioje popiežius atvyko.
At the beginning of September 1993, the Pope visited Vilnius and the Parliament. Of course, he visited other places especially dear to his heart, like the Hill of Crosses near Šiauliai and the miraculous painting of Our Lady in Šiluva, a pilgrimage destination. He blessed Kaunas and held Mass in Santaka Park and in Vingis Park in Vilnius.
Jisai taip pat davė palaiminimus, laikė mišias kaip ir Vilniuje. Vilniuje, Vingio parke.
Barcelona, Barcelona.
Oh, what a feeling, seeing the flag of Latvia being carried in. I think it can be compared to watching a hockey game with Canada nowadays. Everybody sitting by the TV, and everybody thinking that the whole world sees that there is a Latvia. I think half the world didn't even notice that there was no Latvia, and now there is. But for us, it was huge excitement, a huge deal. I was downtown in a shop. I stepped closer to a TV and saw Igor Vichrovs, our gymnast, winning the gold medal. And it was the first time I saw with my own eyes a Latvian athlete achieve something important. I think that Lithuanian basketball players have brought our country the most victories, and still are. But probably the most glorious victories were during the Barcelona Olympic Games in 1992, when Lithuania took part in the Summer Olympics as an independent country for the first time. I remember Erika Salome's golden victory very well. I remember our entire family was watching TV together. And when she finished first, I remember my granddad jumping up in joy, stomping his feet and clapping. Everybody was very happy about the gold medal. It was the first great success. If you asked an Estonian to name a great Estonian athlete, it would be Andrus Verpalu and Kristina Šmigun. They are cross-country skiers and both have had great success. Victories in big competitions are definitely important for Estonians. They give the feeling of unity. Nobody believed that Russia will ever withdraw its troops because it was too important for Russia. This military base in Latvia, the most concentrated one in the world in Europe, was very important for Russia. After all, we know well enough that roads were built to receive the heavy bombers as close to the western border as possible, so that they could land on these roads and start their attack on hostile imperialism. The Soviet doctrine we were brought up with since school propagated the expansion of the communist empire, that is, the Russian Empire. The more I know about international relations, the surer I am that we almost certainly used the only window of opportunity that we had. The decision to withdraw Soviet troops was also based on U.S.-Soviet and later U.S.-Russia relations. And we must thank the Americans that they demanded, that they stuck to the demand to withdraw the Soviet troops. we adopted a document demanding the withdrawal of Soviet troops from the Baltic countries. My direct demand was to do it within 3 months. When we received word from Moscow that it's absurd, it's impossible to withdraw troops in 3 months, even if they wanted to, I said it was brought in during 3 days. If they were able to bring it in 3 days, then 3 months for withdrawal is a very long time.
Jeigu jie sugebėjo per 3 dienas įvesti, tai 3 mėnesiai yra labai daug. Ją išvesti.
We were probably successful in negotiating the withdrawal of Soviet troops because Yeltsin became leader of Russia. These were perhaps the few Yeltsin years of freedom in the history of the Russian Empire, when Russia was not an empire, but a normal country taking the road of democracy. Only after the withdrawal of troops, the rest of it became possible. Accession to the European Council, the European Union, and NATO. If the army was present, we would live in fear that it could intervene at any moment. Luckily, it didn't happen because of the government of the time and Yeltsin, but there was a possibility. Only after August 1994, we could say that the Baltic countries had totally freed themselves from occupation. The withdrawal of the Russian troops was an incredible blessing, and watching the last railway cars leaving, we all thought in our hearts and said to each other loudly, never to come back. Morning of May 4, 1995, minutes before the long-awaited explosion. I was asked to write a piece of music, and I thought it was a good challenge. Not as much politically, as I was more interested in the symbolic act. In fact, the radar was brought down on my countdown. We had agreed with the Americans on the sequence of blasts in time with music. I had a gigantic plan that would suit the Olympic Games even today. I wanted the individual blasts to coincide with music. Now it's really going. These days, what could be done with that radar that can't be done without it? With our modern equipment, it doesn't make any difference. If somebody wants to aim at something, it doesn't make any difference. But I think that when it collapsed, I felt like, well, I wasn't sorry. My friend woke me up at 6 in the morning and told me that a huge catastrophe had happened. The ferry, Estonia, had sunk. Nobody knew who or how many people had died. The information slowly appeared only later. It was a huge tragedy for Estonia because Estonia is a small country. People know each other. Everybody had somebody or their friend had somebody who was on that ship, or somebody connected to it. My classmate, for example, drowned. A girl a year younger than us drowned too. They both worked on the ferry. Speaking within today's context, maybe it's important to note that many of those who were critical of the road Estonia had chosen, when they covered the accident in the media, tried to see some kind of symbolism because the name of the ferry was Estonia. as if the sinking of the ferry was a bad omen for Estonia's development, which luckily didn't come true. It was a huge tragedy for the Estonian people, for many families, but luckily it was not a sign of the destruction of Estonia's statehood, of Estonia's society. It was a huge misfortune, and I don't know why it happened. Even today, there are many answers and questions. If we look at the problem of Russian minorities in Estonia and Latvia, then right from the start, from the time of the Popular Front and Interfronts, we see that there isn't a spontaneous Russian minority movement. Or in other words, right from the start, there was a clear plan behind it. And that plan was to hinder Estonia's and Latvia's movement towards freedom, and also show the world that the risk of a violent conflict exists here. Off with the occupants. No to fascism. Shame, shame, shame. In fact, we can speak of the influence of Russia's foreign policy here. And unfortunately, through propaganda, it also influences the youth, Russian-speaking youth, creating a myth of their history. Russia, Russia. Of course, when we were nearing the finish line in the restoration of our independence, it was clear that we must join all, absolutely all, international organizations that you can think of. The International Olympic Committee, UNESCO, and of course the United Nations Organization. And therefore, of course, the EU was a dream that came true quite quickly, even though we started to the EU not from a zero, but from a negative position. Estonia had two large goals, to join the European Union and to join NATO. Both goals were correct. The European Union, of course, provided great advantages to Estonia's economy. Namely, we became a part of the economic system of the European Union. NATO, of course, is security. We can see clearly now that it's very important to be in a collective organization that protects itself, especially bearing in mind that our neighbor is Russia. Our position with Latvia and Estonia differed for a while because some of our friends, politicians, thought that it was hopeless and it was better to focus on the European Union, to calm Moscow that we would not try to join NATO. But Lithuania never gave up on this goal. The goal to join the EU and become a member state of NATO, to introduce the euro, was directed towards one thing: the welfare of the people. But for me, welfare is not only a piece of bread or a slice of sausage, because true welfare is impossible without large spiritual saturation. Emotionally, of course, we were sad because our national currency is our national currency. But only very strong countries like the UK and Norway can afford it. But for smaller countries with weaker economies, I think it's inevitable that they join the euro system. But the good news is, you can go abroad and you don't have to exchange currency anymore. You go to Sweden and think, aren't they a bit strange? You travel just 400 kilometers and have to buy kroner. Then there is this kroner and that krona. One is divided by 8, the other by 7. It's such a hassle. Estonians are very cautious by nature and don't make hasty decisions. I think it is already becoming something historically inevitable, and now we can remember it only as something of the past, nothing more. The Soviet occupation intertwined our destinies closely. Deportations, as well as repressions and emigration and Russification, was something that all three nations went through with enormous losses and survived. But we feel the consequences still today. And that is the Baltic Freedom Way. Feeling of freedom, the most important feeling. We felt free.
Aš jau nepakeliu minčių apie tave, kaip obelis apsunkusi nuo vaisių, užlaužiu tragiškai nusvirusias rankas, o tu sakai stovė kaip stovi laisvė.
I have no doubt that the restoration of independence is one of the greatest events of the last 100 years in the entire history of Lithuania.
100 metų per visą Lietuvos istoriją.
I've never lived a life where I've felt any restrictions, that I was restricted. But I would never want to experience it.
Bet aš to ir nenorėčiau patirti.
Šodien, kungs, mēs tevi lūdzam, neļauj Latvijam mirt un zūst. Liec mums vienmēr tavu sauli, brīviem pāri galvai just. Līdz tiem laikiem, kuru šodien nezin vēl nekur neviens. Mūžam brīvs, lai Latviju ērglis savu spārnus izdams skrien.
The chance for small nations to stand together against something horrible and large.
Dod mums spēku, dod mums drosmi, dod mums vienprātību Tēvs.
It was probably the first day when people realized they can believe that something can change.
Siin surmani küll tahan ma kalliks pidada. Muid sellest rada mulle ka viisama. Ma kardaks, et päris tõsiselt.
I'm afraid that we might not have the good, free society that we have now.
Selline hea, vaba ühiskond, nagu meil
At least I think we have. We have democracy.
tundub, et meil on demokraatia.
Maybe it's not perfect, but it's still democracy. All borders are open.
Demokraatia. Kõik piirid on lahti. Ma arvan, et see ei oleks
I think it wouldn't be, because history was so horrible. I suppose it wouldn't be as great as it is now. To be free.